Minasamā ohayō gozaimasu.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Gentlemen, dear guests, it is really a great pleasure for me to welcome you to today's conference, which is entitled Restoring Confidence in Financial Markets, Measures Taken in the European Union and Japan. And I am particularly delighted to see such a large turnout today. I would like to thank our co-hosts, the EU-Japan Center for Industrial Cooperation, for their assistance in gathering outstanding speakers, and also panelists for what will, I'm sure, a very insightful and productive meeting this morning. I would like to extend my warmest welcome, first and foremost, to the representative of the Japanese government, one of our keynote speakers, the first one, Senior Vice Minister Nakatsuka, who is in charge of financial issues, and I would like to thank him for taking time to join us this morning. Mr. Nakatsuka will give us an update on the financial regulatory situation in Japan, and he will also share his insights with us on international regulatory reform issues. But of course, it's my particular pleasure to welcome Commissioner Barnier, who is European Commissioner for the Internal Market and Financial Services, to Tokyo. As Commissioner responsible for the internal market and services, he has played a key role in defining Europe's response to the global financial crisis. The Commissioner will highlight the latest developments in the Eurozone area, including the proactive and historic measures that the European Union is currently undertaking in response to the challenges posed by the sovereign debt crisis. We will also hear from a distinguished panel of specialists, which will be moderated by Mr. Amano from the Japan Center for International Finance, and the panel will look at the need for more robust governance to restore confidence in financial markets. Since the onset of the sovereign debt crisis in 2010, these have indeed been extremely challenging times for Europe. The Eurozone itself has become the subject of the wrong kind of attention, with threats of economic contagion very much overstated. The fundamental problems facing Europe are serious and complex. There can be no doubt about that. And so events like today's are important because they allow us to speak directly to investors and to the Japanese public. And to explain also that the Euro's media critics are mistaken when they predict the Eurozone's imminent failure or disintegration. I think, on the contrary, as the Commissioner will explain, we will see a stronger Europe emerge from this crisis. This will force us to implement painful but urgently necessary reforms to build a more robust economic and financial architecture. But one thing is clear, and there should be no doubt about that. At the highest political level, the European Union has taken decisions not simply to preserve the progress made over the last 55 years, including the euro, but also to dramatically deepen the economic and political integrations. And we will be shortly hearing from Commissioner Barnier himself on one of the key pillars of the reforms that are being put in place: improved surveillance of financial markets. And we will also hear in the next few hours a focus on different challenges facing both Europe and Japan, but we'll also hear about the future prospects, which we firmly believe are bright. And it is very clear that the friendship between Japan and the European Union is getting stronger and growing. Indeed, if I may just go a bit beyond today's scope of this meeting, let me just say that this is going to be a very busy year for EU-Japan relations. We are expecting probably the most intensive program of ministerial-level visits to Tokyo for as long as I can remember. And these will cover everything from foreign policy issues to security, to energy policy, to employment and agriculture. And we will continue to develop our important scientific partnership, which is already providing enormous value in addressing the aftermath of the Fukushima crisis. And at the heart of our work is, of course, our joint project to consolidate both our political and economic relationship by assessing the potential for concluding a deep and comprehensive trade agreement, and in parallel also a linked political framework agreement that would underline the ambition that we have for the EU-Japan strategic relationship. Commissioner Barnier's visit will be an important step in the scoping exercise, and it will culminate when President Van Rompuy and President Barroso will meet Prime Minister Noda later in the year for the annual EU-Japan summit. Like you, I'm looking forward to hearing the views of today's speakers, and I will not be longer than that and hand over the floor to them, because I think we are here at an important juncture in relations between the European Union and Japan, but also with regard to economic and financial developments, and I'm sure that the speakers we will hear will do a lot to clarify a number of issues which have been in our minds over the last weeks and months. Once again, thank you very much for coming, and I'm sure that you will find this a very interesting morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now, we would now like to hear keynote speeches. First of all, I would like to call upon Mr. Ikko Nakatsuka, a Senior Vice Minister, Cabinet Office. Initially, our plan was to have Minister Jimmy with us, but because of his public duties, we have a pleasure of having Minister Nakatsuka in lieu of Minister Jimmy. After his speech, Senior Vice Minister Mr. Nakatsuka will have to leave immediately after his speech. I ask for the participants' kind understanding. Minister Nakatsuka.
Well, thank you everyone for inviting me to this conference commemorating the visit to Japan by Commissioner Barnier. It gives me a great pleasure to be with you today. Thank you. Well, currently not only Europe but globally economic and financial instability is rising, and it's quite timely that EU Commission mission here as well as EU-Japan Center for Industrial Cooperation are co-hosting this big program to talk about the restoration of confidence in the financial market, and it's a very timely event today. Well, as you may know, ever since the Lehman shock back in 2008, under the leadership of G20, international community has been pushing forward the financial regulatory reform, and Japan has been actively taking part in it. And today, based on the European situation, I'm sure that many discussions will take place. And I, for one, will also like to think about the international dealings toward the international financial regulatory reform. First is about the European debt issue. Well, at the moment, as a result of a part of a European country's fiscal problem, it had led to the rise in the tension in the financial market globally. And through the global financial system, there is a concern that contagion might take place to go beyond Europe and reach non-European countries. So we hope that as early as possible in Europe, economic growth will be restored, fiscal deficit situation will be improved, and gain the confidence on the financial market. I hope a comprehensive policy package can be formulated and be put to implementation as soon as possible. As you may know, looking at the Japanese financial system after the burst of the bubble, we've been hit with various different difficulties, and hence we had taken many of the policy measures to respond to them, and at last we have restored the stability. And in this context, the most difficult decision that we needed to make was to inject the public funds to financial institutions who had under capital situation. But a decisive decision was made by Japanese government, and the injection of public funds was decided, and together with it, asked the financial institutions to strengthen their lendings to the SMEs. And these measures were necessary, and we think it was very effective. So based on the situation and experiences of Japan, we could say to you that in order to strengthen the capital adequacy of the banks when needed, public funds can be mobilized to help the recapitalization so that market confidence can be restored and the financial functions can be maintained and strengthened. In order to enhance the financial system stability, of course, the strengthening of the capital adequacy is important, but apart from that, prepare for the resolution scheme and to have a self-discipline by the financial institutions themselves, and to have an improvement made in the supervisory capability of the supervisory authorities. Of course, ever since the second half of the last year, economic growth outlook of Europe have been become worse, which is a source of concern. So a balanced approach of strengthening fiscal discipline on one hand and to restore economic growth is needed, which is needed for the regaining market confidence, which will become very important. I'm sure that the European government and authority people are fully cognizant of these needs, definitely. So going forward, we expect very much that under the strong leadership, European leaders will be implementing the policies. Well, looking at the Japanese financial sector, even under the recent tense moment seen at the financial market, our healthy soundness is being maintained. We have ample capital adequacy and liquidity. Japanese financial system is maintaining its stability. And going forward, with regard to the outlook of Japanese economy, there are downward risks like overseas economy, a continuation of strong yen, sluggishness of equity prices, and so forth. And also there is a rise in the instability of international financial market, which could give further negative impact upon our financial market, which is a concern. As far as FSA is concerned, we are working closely with overseas counterparts, looking closely the developments of international financial market, both at home and abroad, and looking at the financial institutions' soundness situation as well. There is a responses out to the aftermath of the earthquake and to deal with SME financing, and we would like to continue working toward the maintenance and the strengthening of the financial functions and to revitalize the local economy. Now let me shed a light on the international financial regulatory reform and Japanese responses to it. Ever since the Lehman shock in 2008, self-reflection have been done by us internationally in order to raise the soundness of the financial institutions. Many of the debates have taken place globally, major pillar of which is the formulation of Basel III. Well, as for the implementation of Basel III, Japan had asserted that its implications on the economy need to be considered fully, so that ample time will be allocated for the transition period. Of course, the economy and the financial situation at the moment is very severe, but because we are hit with a very difficult time, it's very important to steadily implement the points which have been agreed upon. Japan as well as the EU are making preparations so that the Basel III can be put into implementation in accordance with the internationally agreed schedule. And also liquidity rule is to be reviewed, and we hope that we can have an international examination on this issue. And at the financial crisis, large-scale financial institutions had failed, which had given a grave impact upon the overall financial system, so that public funds has been injected to bail out those financial institutions. This is a too big to fail issue. In order to deal with this issue, what is called GC fees was the point on which agreement was reached comprehensively at the last year's Cannes summit. It's not only a matter of strengthening capital regulations, but looks to the improvement and effectiveness of supervision and inspection, as well as coming up with a recovery and resolution plan. And it reflects the views of Japan, and it's going to be a comprehensive measures in a well-balanced way. I think two big points will draw attention in going forward with a debate on the international financial regulatory reform. For one thing, there are non-bank entities, how to regulate them and how to supervise them. That is one issue. For example, essentially, there are entities which are providing credit intermediary activity, but they are not regulated as banks. So we are talking about here the shadow banking issue. And on this issue right now, each country has to coordinate with one another to have a fact-finding and think about the supervision and regulation. And this action and the procedures are taken at the moment, inclusive of the data collection of the facts, as well as the strengthening the monitoring. Japan would like to take active part in the international debate. And the second has to do with the implementation of the regulation, as I said, inclusive of the Basel III, with regard to the regulatory framework agreed upon internationally. It's important that each country would compatibly would implement those agreed items and have a good coordination and cooperation amongst the countries concerned, which is very important. One of the examples is the OTC derivative regulation. With regard to the OTC derivatives, along with the G20 agreement, Japan is going ahead with a necessary reform, as well, inclusive of reporting to the information depositories for the trade and central clearing based on the standardized transactions and so forth. And through the FSBs and bilateral consultations, we believe it is important that each country have to coordinate and work together with other countries so that the international agreement can be implemented without leaving any vacuum or redundancy of regulation. So thinking about the financial regulatory reform in future, we have to always pay regards to the Asian countries and other emerging market economies who are known for their very robust economic growth lately. Japan is working closely with authorities of Asia as well as any other emerging market countries as well. And will work hard to bring about the stability of financial system globally, inclusive of the emerging markets, as I have been talking thus far. Global financial market is faced with lots of challenges, like bringing about stability in financial system and going ahead with the financial regulatory reform like we have done before. Japan is willing to continue cooperating with the EU and work together at the G20 and FSB, hoping that we could jointly lead the discussion there so that hopefully we can get an effective and balanced conclusion whereby we can make a very good contribution to laying down a robust regulatory framework. Lastly, I would like to once again thank the sponsor for inviting me here today. And with this, I would like to conclude my speech. I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nakatsuka, Senior Vice Minister. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the second keynote speech we would like to have. Our speaker is Mr. Michel Barnier, European Commissioner for Internal Market and Services. He will discuss new economic and financial governance in the EU. He will be giving his speech in French. We will have Japanese, English, and French languages available. We have 3 languages available. So please tune in to whichever channel you may wish to listen to. Commissioner Barnier, the floor is yours.
Arigato, Monsieur Tsukamoto. Et merci à vous, ainsi qu'à Monsieur Jora, qui anime.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me today. I also like to thank the EU-Japan Center for Industrial Cooperation for organizing today's meeting. First of all, allow me to speak in my mother tongue, which is French. First of all, I would like to thank you all for starting my speech. Thank you for being here despite your busy schedule. We are very grateful. Thank you so much for taking your time out to meet with me, one of the commissioner of the European Commission. European Commission is a unique institution. We take a collective system. And within the EU, in a collective fashion, we don't have a prime minister of the European Union per se, so we are taking on the roles collectively. There are member countries of the EU and the European Parliament, and many proposals are made to them. And decisions are made, followed up, and we are making sure that those processes would go on smoothly at the Commission. Ever since 2 years ago, I have been in charge of the Commissioner, in charge of internal market and financial services. So within my capacity, this is the first time for me to visit with you in Japan. It's a great pleasure for me as a commissioner to come here with my current portfolio. There are so many things that I would like to thank you for, particularly the EU-Japan Center for Industrial Cooperation, who is a co-sponsor for today's program. I thank their cooperation, and also I'd like to thank all the ambassadors here who represent EU member countries. There are so many of you who have come from Japan, and we have just heard from our Senior Vice Minister in charge of financial services, Mr. Nakatsuka. And yesterday it was very good that I was able to meet with Minister Jimmy and others. EBC people and the EU mission here, I would like to thank them as well. Mr. Ducco Del Gorgi of EBC, I would like to thank you for your support. And more than before, I really hope that all of us work ever more harder to strengthen our already strong bilateral ties between Japan and EU. I was originally planning to be with you last year, very weak on the March the 11th last year, actually. But of course, it's given that I needed to give up that schedule then. So once again, from the bottom of my heart, I would like to express our respect to the dignity and the courage of Japanese people. You have been hit with a triple calamity at the same time, but with a great courage and dignity, you have been responding to the disaster. Much praise have been voiced in Europe, and I'm very pleased to be here today in Tokyo. I know you are working very hard to reconstruct the affected area like you had done last year. I know that you are being very courageous in tackling the challenge of reconstructing the affected area. Of course, the Senior Vice Minister touched upon the Euro crisis and Eurozone sovereign debt crisis. So maybe it's a good time for me to give you a comprehensive assessment on this, what's really happening inside Europe and what we are doing about it. Of course, mass media is reporting a lot of things about the Euro crisis. I thank for their coverage, but not only the people associated with the economy and fiscal matters, I know that ordinary people in society at large are drawn to the topic of Euro crisis. It's an item of higher attention. Culture and the economy and the politics between EU and Japan has been enjoying a deep ties. Europe is faced with a complex crisis. It's not a single crisis. So far, we've been going through various different crises in the past, but this time this crisis is quite serious. So sometimes it makes us very difficult to understand clearly. So first of all, I would like to mention to you the fact that function of EU is very complicated. We are not a single country. We are not aiming at becoming one European nation. We don't have a European ethnic race as such. 27 different member countries and 23 different languages are spoken. And 27 different member countries comprise the European Union. And there are 27 countries, 27 different European countries people, but they are trying to live together and abide by a same set of rules, uniform rules, and live together. That was a decision made. Comprehensively shared mutualization is the word that we use in France. Some of the sovereignty will be shared, in other words, and the foundation for the politics will be laid down, and our daily activities will be founded on that mutual platform. But we are not China, nor Japan, nor US. We are not a single country as the EU, which makes the situation much more complicated. And it's not the first time that we've been faced with a crisis. Ever since World War II, we've been hit with many crises. First of all, we had learned a great lesson from the World War II. And some very courageous believer of Europe during the 1950s, European statesmen have risen to the challenge and came up with a lofty ideal to consolidate European countries. It started with a 6 founding member in Europe, and it's very interesting, so I will tell you this, that at that time, 2 strategic items, the steel and coal, which are very important raw material, which was a pillar, and the sharing of the two were introduced. In other words, to aim at having a sustainable, peaceful coexistence, and to work together and live together. And living together will be beneficial to all of the participants, and each one needs the other. That was a structure which was aimed at. That was our first starting point. We now have a single market, and I am one of the responsible person for it because I'm the commissioner in charge of the internal market. And we have gone through many crises in the past. And every time we've been hit with a crisis, we emerged stronger and better. That has been the case in the past. So as a politician, I could say definitely to you that, of course, a commissioner of the European Union is a politician, be it male or female. So I can assure you that we can survive and can emerge even stronger after this crisis. Ever since several months ago, important meetings have been held. 27 countries' leaders have made an important decision. Of course, under the leadership of President Barroso, European Commission have made proposals. Initially, at the very high level, decisions have been made. In Tokyo, I would like to say to you personally that in a detailed manner, measures have been taken to deal with the current crisis, and I could assure you that Europe will emerge stronger after the crisis. Now, what is the crisis that we are faced with, and what are the non-crisis related matters? It's not a crisis of euro for the past 10 years or ever since 10 years ago. Euro became one of the key currencies of the world. It's quite young in terms of its history. It's a new currency, of course. So it's only natural that vis-a-vis yen or vis-a-vis US dollar, euro's value need to be assessed over a long-term horizon. But every day, several millions of people are using euro. And euro is one of the important trump card that Europe has. It will continue to be so. Well, 4 years ago, come to think of it, in the United States, the subprime and Lehman Brothers shock had occurred, and European situation is continuance from this event, which had brought about a big shock. Globally, throughout the world, financial system and the banking system have been hit very hard. And in many of the countries, economic and social crisis had occurred. And as fiscal stimulus package needed to be mobilized in order to tide over the situation, which was quite costly to the European countries. But this stimulus was a necessary action then. But as a result of that, it overlapped with a long-standing situation of massive fiscal deficit, be it left government or conservative government, regardless of which. In European countries, in many of the countries, very lousy management have been done on the fiscal situation. So easily, the blank check have been written without thinking much, which have continued for a large number of the years, and the country cannot be founded of massive debt. We are creating debt as we speak, and it needs to be paid back by the taxes to be paid by our future generations, our children's generation. In 2010 or 2009, those were the situations we've been faced with. There was a financial crisis, and the debt has been amassing over the period of 20 to 30 years in the past, which is weighing heavily upon our shoulders nowadays. It is true that culture for the fiscal stability can be found in countries like Germany, in Europe, and other countries were expected to follow suit in terms of its approaches. But European public debt need to be looked at from a bigger picture. In 2010, the debt within the Eurozone reached to 85% of the GDP, which is a very big figure. Too big, if I may say so. Our partner countries like Japan and the United States, our debt level needs to be compared against our partner countries as well. I would say that our partner countries' fiscal deficit level is higher than ours. But we are suffering from the loss of confidence on the European market and the finances. Core problem is the declining confidence vis-à-vis Europe. Europeans themselves might have lost the confidence on what Europe has been doing in terms of building a comprehensive society. Of course, vitality can be found in Asian region. It has a most high potential for growth in future. US and Africa might also have a confidence issue. There are triple challenges we observe in regards to the confidence. And I myself are personally committed to the following. As a EU commissioner, I would certainly fulfill my responsibility. After the financial crisis, back in 2007-2008, there were signs for the eventual economic growth, but because of the crisis which had occurred very recently, economic stagnation is slated for a few number of months to come. For 2012, growth rate will be 0.5% or 0.6%, something like that. But looking at the sovereign debt crisis, it could spread, and it would spread over the interbank market. Faced with a crisis, we are not being that pessimistic. And we are not being too catastrophic or nostalgic, missing the good old days. We are not like that. EU leadership has a high determination in dealing with the issue. Because of this high degree of determination, for the past several months, unprecedented actions have been taken one after another to rebuild the situation and to learn the lesson from the past. As for the monetary union, we have a monetary union, and there's no way that economic policy will be separate and different. For the past 10-year period, pursuing the road of monetary union, it is true that we have not attained the fiscal union, so that the fiscal policy of member countries have been separate. Fiscally and taxation-wise and so forth, but we are about to change that because big transformation is changing. Don't ever underestimate them. I appeal to you. For the sake of economic union, we are trying to lay down the conditions and fulfill that conditions. We are adhering to the single currency and uphold that. It is true that 10 or 15 years ago, the spirit hasn't reached that far, but now people are feeling very courageous in pursuing this road. Of course, some of the people may not agree with us. There are many people who predict the future, write something negative about Europe, the end of Euro, end of Europe, and so forth. But conversely, I would like to say to you as a European politician, and I am one of the patriotic person, and this is the second time that I tell you, after going through current crisis, I would definitely appeal to you that Europe will become even more stronger, emerge stronger. It may not suit the preference of the naysayers, but when it comes to discipline and the stability, we will work very hard at it to achieve them. By sharing a single currency, of course, for stability and discipline, we need to make a mechanism. We would work at it very patiently. I would like to see the financial services to serve the interest of the real economy, like Americans are doing and saying. With regard to sovereign debt, we will continue to deal with it. And for the countries and for the citizens of Europe, we would work hard to bring about the sustainable new growth and find a new driver for new growth going forward. And let me be more specific about it. First is in regards to our responses to the European debt crisis. Well, for the past few months, we have taken many of the emergency measures to stabilize our economy. Firstly, vis-à-vis Greece, very exceptional decisions have been made to provide financial assistance to Greece because Greece was at the difficult situation, most difficult situation. So this was the exceptional action taken vis-à-vis the exceptional case of Greece. That was the first point. And secondly, in order to strengthen the European banks, we have taken actions. Temporarily, the capital adequacy rule was decided to be raised for major banks in Europe and guarantee the fundraising needed for that, which was quite exceptional. This is a measure to restore confidence on European banks, and ever since a few days and few months, the banking sector is now showing a very positive behavior. For the first time in history, ECB said that for a 3-year period they come up with a proposal for providing necessary funding to the banks in Europe. 500 banks in Europe, 489 billion euro worth of funding was provided for and guaranteed. So at a very favorable condition, European banks will be able to refinance. In 2012, first quarter, some of the debt needs to be repaid and the due date will come, but refinancing will become possible. And together with the Japanese assistance, to which we are very grateful, thanks to the Japanese assistance for EFSF, we were able to raise the necessary funding for the fund and facility. We are faced with a big crisis. It's not only the emergency measures that will be taken. That is not enough. We have learned a great deal from this crisis, many lessons, and we have renewed our self-recognition as a result of the crisis. This time, structural weaknesses have been revealed and uncovered. The public debt tends to rise. That's one weaknesses, and one more weaknesses is the lack of economic coordination. All these were revealed as a result of this crisis. So we really like to work toward the sustainable path going through this crisis and emerging stronger. So structural weaknesses need to be responded to. Countries like Greece and the recapitalization of the banks, those are important points, and we will work on the important point. Now let me be more specific about the structural issues that we are faced with. First of all, there is going to be a European stability mechanism which is going to be provided for. So EFSF will of course be replaced with ESM. And the ESM will come into implementation in July 2012. And much more stricter rules have been placed upon the financial institutions and on the countries to provide more strict rules on the fiscal deficit. And as for the internal budget, the balanced budget is something that is going to be provided for or asked to be achieved. If it is not achieved, then the sanctions can be taken. And also with regard to this fiscal compact, all the member countries will work very closely. 17 countries are the Eurozone members. They have a single currency, but 17 countries have 17 different economic policy and the taxation policy, which was a contradiction, and this contradiction needs to be resolved. Of course, this is the major structural reform. It takes time to achieve it. Much longer time needed than the timing which is familiar in the financial market. But it's a very historic venture. No precedent in the past within the process toward European integration. We have no precedent in the past for carrying out this magnitude of structural reform. And the political determination is so high. By all means, European integration is to continue. new rules would be difficult to be accepted by the member countries of Europe because it's highly constraining. But we cannot let the fiscal deficit situation to be left unattended. No way. Over a long period of time, stability and confidence need to be regained by all means, and that would benefit definitely all the member countries of Europe. Emergency measures have been taken toward the sovereign debt crisis, and taking emergency measures is of course important, but we should not lose sight of one more important point, which is the need to restore confidence. And the financial regulation is needed. During the financial crisis of 2008, it's really having a lingering effect to this day. Socially and economically, implications on the human being have been very hard, which is still continuing to this day. I, myself, as well as the European leaders, should never forget this over short period of time. It's not business as usual. We cannot behave as if last crisis has been over. We are still in the process of having to learn the lesson from the last crisis. That is why this is included under the agenda of G20, as Senior Vice Minister Nakatsuka had mentioned. We also have our own roadmap, and which is coinciding with the roadmap of G20. Whatever may lie ahead, the decision made by the G20 is going to be implemented by European Union. This is a strong determination we have. And I'm sure that at a panel later on, Ms. Calvino will be talking about this. Who, I'm sure, is going to brief you about the current update of the regulation and so forth. At the moment, we had completed drawing and drafting the bill, and at the European Commission, at the Parliament level, bill is being examined. One important point I would like to draw your attention to is that 3 supervisors have been made, respectively in charge of the banks, the securities, and the insurance. There has been a different economic policy pursued by the Eurozone members, and the supervision will also separate from one member country to another. By looking at the European banks and the insurance companies and so forth, all those pan-European active institutions will be subject to the supervision to be conducted by the relevant supervisors. So this is a European-wide authority. And also, following on the G20, we are about to achieve 4 goals. 4 goals will be as follows, very briefly. First goal is to provide for the financial institutions stability and improve their function. First, in regards to the banks, the capital requirement and liquidity requirement will be raised. This is based on the Basel III. And next has to do with the insurance companies. With regard to the insurers, the Solvency III directive will be put into force from 2013. And also the Volcker rule, which is proposed in the US, and And the Vickers report, which came out in UK, we are also interested in following these movements elsewhere. And Mr. Vikkanen, who is a chair from the Finland Central Bank, is taking a lead in examining these issues on the part of Europe for the development scenes in the US and in UK. And also another rule for the registration requirement and coming up with stricter supervision for the CRAs, credit rating agencies. In the past, several mistakes have been made by the CRAs in coming up with a rating decision. Of course, rating agency is something that is needed, but we do need a larger number and population of CRAs in addition to Big Three. And the highly transparent credit rating agencies will be needed. So automatically, banks and the managers and the financial institutions, too much reliance on the CRA's rating should be reduced. And obligate rating agencies to come up with a high transparency in coming up with a decision rating for the sovereign debt in particular, and also to enhance the competition amongst the CRAs. Second objective will be as follows. The fairness and transparency and efficiency of the financial market needs to be improved. Just recently, with regard to short selling and credit default swap, the agreement has been made to regulate them more strongly, because during the summer last year, big problem have arisen to produce a big volatility in the market. So those trades now can be suspended temporarily, because supervisory authorities are given the authority to do that this time. And with regard to the OTC derivatives, we are hoping that very soon the agreement will be made to afford more transparency to the OTC derivative. I see that in Japan too you have a big trade on this, as well as in the United States. And the OTC derivative represents the market amounted to 600 trillion euro annually, which is pretty big. And also there is a point about the financial instruments and market directive revision. We already adopted the revised version of MiFID. And as for the highly traded, frequently traded, high-frequency trades and MTFs, certain measures will be taken, because too high a volatility is not desirable. For food and energy related derivatives, which is linked to the commodity, which needed to be dealt with, hunger, famine in Africa is becoming a big risk. So in order to respond to that, the revision had been made for the MiFID. And third goal purports to regain the consumer's confidence. It's going to be a top priority issue for this 2012 year. The deposit will be protected up to 100,000 euro. And also initiative is taken to protect the borrowers of the mortgage loan, and ask for more transparency in the fees which are charged by the banks. And for the sake of investors in retail financial products, more accurate and more timely, easier to understand information is to be provided in order to protect the consumers. Banks and other financial institutions will have to come up with a better governance, particularly the board of the financial institutions have to appropriately discharge their responsibility on the points of preventing risks and managing the risks appropriately. And a package of rules attuned to that is being proposed. And the fourth goal would be as follows. Taxpayers should never be called upon to bail out the troubled financial institution, and for that, the EU needs to introduce a scheme. Together with the European Commission, in order to prevent a financial crisis and banking crisis, a scheme is being prepared. So within the matter of a few weeks, the proposal is to be submitted. Sorry, I have taken a lengthy time in describing to you the detailed points, but I know that the panel discussion will follow. I know that a detailed account will be given by the panelists afterwards, but I've been talking about the measures which have been employed to bring Europe out of the sovereign debt crisis and to provide for the financial stability, and to appeal for the better coordination amongst the European countries for the economy policy, and we are trying to search for a wise and better regulation. All the players, inclusive G20, all these countries are making a similar effort, but that in itself is not enough. The employment policy, economic growth policy, policies to raise competition and competitiveness are needed all the more. So this is a second big chunk of responsibility that I need to serve as a commissioner in charge, coming up with a tool so that growth, employment, and competitiveness can be enhanced. As I said, ever since the 1950s, we started with a steel and coal community, running up to the creation of a single market. And this is our important trump card that we have. It's very important for US, China, and other major countries in the world alike. They would like to, of course, make inroads into the big market of Europe, which are run by same sets of rules, having 500 million consumers and more than 20,000 companies working inside the internal market. And every day and every week, we are patiently making efforts to make better our single market. We do have a single market, and as a commissioner in charge, I would appeal to you that we will continue to take appropriate measures so that we can consolidate our single market even further and make the single market better market. Then we can create 3 or 4 different posts and driver for the growth. Just a few months ago, together with the Commission Chairman Barroso, we've been thinking about Single Europe Act, which purports to facilitate intra-market imports and trade, and the trade with non-Europe countries using the single passport within the area. And it covers the venture capital operations regarding SMEs as well. 19% of the GDP is the area accounted for by the government procurement. There's the local government bodies and the national government bodies who commissions the work, public procurement. And we really hope that we can work smoothly on this, and we legislated the relevant law on the public procurement, facilitating SMEs to take part more easily. And on the January 31st, EU summit is going to take place in Brussels, and we hope that we can finalize this law. And also, at least we hope to make a EU-wide single patent. I was a proponent of this 1 year ago. 23 different languages need to be used to write a patent right now in Europe. For protecting patent in Europe, 10 times larger costs need to be paid for Europe than the United States, which is a weakness of European competitiveness. So we are almost there to achieve the single patent in Europe. There is going to be a ministerial meeting, council meeting, and the leaders meeting, and very soon, hopefully, this single patent is going to be introduced, and the Single Europe Act is going to be finalized. And you know the new Prime Minister of Italy. I met with Prime Minister Monti, and also I talked with David Cameron, Prime Minister UK. They were supportive of this. We hope that we can jointly take a stimulus measures to the internal market. We are looking for a stronger European economy, more organized single market, and a more organized monetary and financial policy. I'm here in Tokyo with you today, and within the region of Asia, you are playing a very important role. More open market, is very important for Asia as well. Particularly, we would like to strengthen our dialogue with Japan. Well, as Ambassador has mentioned, we are working on the 2 items. The first has to do with conclusion of FTAs, and another has to do with something which stands at the extension of something I done before, GPA agreement at the WTO. Government procurement agreement that China has not joined board, but maybe soon in future. I hope that the government procurement market will become more open through our measures. Well, I thank everyone for coming. I was very delighted to be very candid with you today. And major actions are taken to go out of this crisis in Europe. We are highly determined. We are looking for more stable, more progressed Europe, and always aiming to achieve a global peace, particularly between Japan and Europe. We hope to see an even better relationship established. Japan and EU together account for 40% of the total economy in the world. That is the importance of the role that we play in the global economy. That is why we have to work together. Our interests may not be exactly the same, but we can work on our mutual confidence relationship and try to achieve a win-win relationship. We can be an opening up of trade, WTO's GPA agreement, and so forth. I hope we can work closely, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder. We have 2 flags in front of us, which is very symbolic. We are working together, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, side by side. Let's try to do that into the long number of years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnier. We will have a question. それで
Now, I hope that there'll be some dialogue with the participants, and that is exactly the desire of Commissioner Barnier. And I would like to open up the floor for your questions and comments. Anyone with questions or comments, please raise your hands. You could ask your questions in Japanese, English, or in French. Please state your name and affiliation before you ask your succinct questions. Thank you. Right.
Thank you very much for your passionate and inspiring talk about the way forward for European Union. Many of us here are also believer in your word and Monet's word, that is, a crisis strengthens Europe, and crisis improves Europe. But nonetheless, this creates a sort of a dangerous game, it seems to me, because this induces Europe to be a sort of crisis-driven area. So without crisis, the major improvement cannot be achieved. So that's a dangerous scenario. And how do you overcome this sort of dangerous cycle? I mean, you say that you are now proactive in preparation of many measures. However, the treaty is very difficult to change. So many things can be achieved only with a major amendment of a European Union treaty. So how can you devise flexibility in amending a treaty for better Europe? Thank you very much.
Mr. Barnier, please.
Merci, Monsieur Takashi, de cette réponse, de cette question.
Thank you very much for your question. I have spoken about the past crisis. The financial crisis has been with us for the past 4 years, which was originally triggered by the US. And there is a public debt crisis occurring, epicenter of which is in Europe. And as a result of this, a necessary reform is now underway. Well, of course, it has been more desirable that European economy could have reformed without the occurrence of the crisis. But it's not the fact that we need a crisis for Europe to progress. We are built on the lessons we learned from the World War II. As what I described, we are looking at peace and stability and looking for the economic interest and the benefit. However, looking at the young history of Europe after the war since 60 years, there are many other examples. Big and small reform have been put into place under the political motive. Even if without the presence of a crisis, reform was carried out. 15 years ago, euro was thought about, and 10 years ago, euro was introduced. It was not motivated by a big crisis. European leaders like Mr. Mitterrand, Mr. Kohl, and Mr. de Roo, all these European leaders made a strong determination to give a birth to single currency. So it was not because crisis was there that such a development had continued. I know that a crisis may give us negative impact as well as positive impact. This time around, our fiscal deficit is being reduced by member countries, and I served the ministerial post 4 times myself, so I am familiar with the political scene of Europe. But this was the first time that I have come to observe this. All of the European countries, regardless of the political party, belief, be it France or Great Britain, which is not a member of Eurozone, but all the EU member countries are uniformly trying to make efforts to reduce their fiscal deficit and to cut down on their fiscal spending. They are doing it very courageously, with a firm determination. Because we are aiming at achieving a sustainable, better governance after the crisis. Collective surveillance may have to do with this, and countries are trying to work together. We need to be flexible. Presently, in regards to the economic coordination, we are discussing the adoption of a new rule or treaty compact. We need to debate about this. Of course, from time to time, there are lack of confidence amongst the member countries, so we need to document the agreement and consolidate the platform and make clear fiscal and economic situation. But we have an existent treaty, and the tools are contained in them which can be put to use. And already some flexibility has been provided for within the treaty. Take Lisbon Treaty, for example. There is an enhanced cooperation provision. We are treading the same path. All the 27 different countries are treading the same direction for path. But some of them can become a first starter. Then they can go ahead of the rest, and others can catch up. I told you about the single Europe patent, which will bring about a big benefit, and I proposed this 1 year ago. Out of 27, 2 countries said they would opt out. Italy and Spain would opt out from the single patent. But I think it is just for temporary measure. Eventually, all the countries would participate. 25 countries would go for the single patent, and the remaining 2 can participate anytime as they please. And we will progress. We are not a single country, being a European Union. And personally, there is one more point I need to mention in terms of the consistency. Single market, which is made up of 27 different member countries. So equally, I would like to make an appeal to all of the 27 countries.
If you have questions, perhaps we should take a couple of questions at the same time.
My name is Duco Dolgorge, European Business Council, and thank you very much for your words and introduction. Commissioner Barnier, I would like to ask you to please, for my question, to consider beyond the EU and to consider also beyond simply economy. You've covered, I think, very well the economic crisis and what the possibilities are for the EU. My concern, and we've talked about it, we are in a crisis, and we do seem to be going from one crisis to another, whether it's an economic crisis now or the ecological crisis or the social crisis which is coming. I feel at the moment that we are treating the patient, humanity, and humanity, we're now treating it with one band-aid, as I say, on the economy and another time on ecology. We need to look at the whole patient, and that means, as far as I'm concerned, and I would like to ask you, should we be considering as humanity looking at the whole system? Should we be considering a green field exercise. What are the major reasons why we are going into these crises? Is it because we have adopted a system which is not necessarily the right system, which has been thought of by only one or two people, and which has then been automatically adopted? And I hope people will forgive me for saying this. We talk now only about capitalism versus communism, but surely we can think beyond such simple terms and think about a total business-like exercise where you do a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats facing humanity, and properly analyze that without putting labels on them and saying, what do we need to do as humanity, as politicians, as businessmen, to create, as you've described, the stable, long-term ecology that we need as humanity? It's a very big question, but quite frankly, I have read hundreds of books and I've listened to hundreds of people, and I can't help but think that we need a major overhaul based on pragmatism and a collective view of how we should move forward. The Limits to Growth was written in 1972, and I know most people in this room will know The Limits to Growth, commissioned by the Club of Rome. We have learned nothing, as far as I'm concerned, from that book. I'm the leader of the European Business Council. I want to make sure that businesses thrive going forward in the next 20, 30, 100 years. And I'd like to ask if you can please at least, the question is, would you agree that we need to think much more fundamentally rather than addressing only one crisis after another? Thank you. Sorry I was a little bit long.
There is a question over there. Please.
Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire, de venir.
Thank you, Commissioner Barnier. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for visiting Japan. We have a snow outside today. It is unfortunate, but I believe this is a sign of welcome to Commissioner Barnier, I would say. I love snow. For 20 years.
Si.
Aussi la neige.
For 20-year period, I represent the most snowbound country in Europe, and in Nagano, Winter Olympic was held, which was a great success, and I know very well about the snow in Japan.
Well, earlier you said, as you said earlier, well, as you repeatedly said, I'm sure that EU will become stronger through overcoming the crisis. This is my question. If I may switch to English.
I would like to question, because I heard that you are very expert of the inclusion or confrontation with the right-wing parties, extreme political movement. I know that even in France, some nationalistic or popularistic movement is becoming more and more popular these days. And yes, Japan is a rather homogeneous country compared to your country, but because we have some diplomatic conflicts with our neighbor countries, which can easily turn to nationalism. So I would like to ask you, well-experienced European politicians, how to confront with the populism or the nationalism of the extreme ideas. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
You have asked me a very interesting yet very broad-ranging two questions. I talked about the economy, European crisis, and the measures to bring Europe out of crisis. And EU and Japan is not isolated from the rest of the world, but there is a global challenges ahead of us. In order to respond to that, Japan and EU needs to work closely together, having a good dialogue and cooperation. That's what I said. During the 90s, bipolar system had been disintegrated, and we haven't yet learned every lessons out of it. We used to have a confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States. Its bipolar, polarized world structure is now over and finished with, and ever since we have seen many of the developments, inclusive of the globalization, as well as development of democracy. Democratization is still going on in Europe, and half of Europe used to be under the dictatorship, under the communist regime. And in Latin America, there is a right-wing government taking over the rule. So are some of the African countries and some countries in Asia. But the democratization is going on. Looking at the Middle East and the Near East, there are movements which we are observing. And through the international trade, true progress of humankind is being achieved. The millions of people, hundreds of millions of people in emerging market economies are now getting out of abject extreme poverty. Of course, there are negative points out of the development. During the up until 1990s, we had the Cold War structure which had disintegrated, and now we are in the disorderly world, so to speak. In many of the areas, our world has become more unstable and more vulnerable and lacks equity and fairness. Just the other day at the UN, when I was serving as a foreign minister of France back in September 2004, I spoke at the UN. Previous speaker right before me was President Bush, who talked about global security, stability, and so forth. I worked together with the President of the US and the head of China and so forth, particularly in regards to Lebanon, to liberate Lebanon under the rule of Syria and so forth. We've been working together. And I said to President Bush then, we have to work toward making a more firm world, which has to be more fair and more equitable, founded on justice. Justice and the fairness is very important, but we don't seem to have achieved that yet. Because we are now living under the multipolar world. Look at G20. Not the G7 or G8, but now we have G20. And many of the countries have to be on the UN Security Council because it used to be dominated by the only major countries of the world, and FAO is an organization which should be transformed to strictly deal with food and the security. Food security, global poverty issue has been my pet subject that I've been following, and March 11 earthquake and tsunami in Japan, which I referred to on the other side of the world. Personally, I have looked at poor countries like Haiti. Just one single earthquake takes lives of 150,000 people, like in the case of Haiti. And of course, there was an Indonesian earthquake which had produced a tsunami before, but much more than that, a large number of lives have been lost in Haiti. In spring, lots of famine had taken place in Africa. We are looking to build a world which is more stable, and global negotiations is underway for the climate change. There are dangers and risks out there, and biggest one of which is a climate change risk. No one can be immune from the impact of a climate change. Production, consumption of products, transport of products. No one is immune from impact coming from the climate change. I wrote many books on this. You talked about snow today. I come from Sabowa Prefecture, and I've been serving as a Speaker of the House there for 20 years. And I worked with Jampo Kiri, the famous skier. I think Japanese people know him very well, right? And together with Mr. Kiri in Albertville Winter Olympic, I was one of the important members of the organizing committee. So let's look at the winter sports. By the end of this century, if the temperature goes up by 1 degree or 2 degrees Celsius, then all the ski resorts and mountainous resorts economy would change. It's not only limited to the Alpine region in Europe. So I'm working as a European. I'm a French citizen, but I'm working for the good of entire Europe. I hope Japan and the rest of the world will take part in discussing jointly the new order for the world. We have to work together. Europe has to get united. Germany alone will not able to achieve a big goal. And in UK, there is a David Cameron led the government there, and he wrote a document supporting our idea to strengthen the single market. Came out from Downing Street, and 5 columns have been stated on his letter. Every 10-year period, 10 top list of countries can be listed. Top 10 league table in the global economy, and out of which 4 European countries are included in the top 10 list, and so is Japan for a long time. And 10 years after, what will be happened? Every 10 years, 1 European country will lose its status within the top league of 10. It's a pity. I don't like to see it happen. So if many of the European countries would like to remain in the top 10 list of global economy way into the future, then of course we have to work unitedly. We need to work together internationally with Japan and with many of the emerging market economies, and contribute to the making of new order based on the multipolar structure. Listen to what others have to say and work together. And one of the forums is the G20. But the issue is that what has been agreed upon needs to be implemented by all means. President Sarkozy said in the G20, many of the important decisions have been made at the G20. There are important agendas going ahead, thinking about the stability of the global financial architecture, talking about euro and dollar and volatility of the currency, which need to be restrained. What about the commodities like agricultural products prices fluctuating and so forth that need to be dealt with? And there are so many things I could say about the creation of a new order in the world, but more than anything else, Europe and Japan has to work together for introducing the new order in the world, which is more fair, more equitable, and more stable. And we have to be on board to negotiate these things. We are faced with multiple crises. Socially and economically, impact is being felt. The populism is gaining force nowadays. Right-wingers or the extreme leftists, left and right, extremists, Here and there, we can see a rise of populism in Finland, in the Netherlands, in the France, in various different sections of the country. We can see the rise of populism, which is very dangerous in terms of democracy and the human rights and the values. They pose a problem. Because these people, from time to time, tend to advocate protectionism, tend to be very nationalistic. Nationalism is like a war. I'm talking about Europe. I don't intend to preach non-Europe countries, but when we talk about nationalism, it's like a war in Europe, one journalist said. 2 days after, the national referendum is going to be held. Not yet a European member, but Croatia will hold a national referendum 2 days after. Some journalists may say it is too early mistake. What about other Balkan countries? Historically, many wars have been fought in Balkans, and there was a war. And Europe were not able to suppress it. European soldiers' lives have been lost, many people's lives have been lost, so nationalism tends to result in war in Europe. So European construction and integration needs to progress. It should continue in an improved way. Rise of the populism, rise of the protectionism is something we need to follow very closely. We have to come up with courageous and brave responses. Go out of the crisis as quickly as possible so that we can get back on the growth track. I know I'm here in Tokyo today speaking to you, but every country I visit, France or Germany, I say the same thing. I went to Lithuania as well as to Malta and said the same thing. If we stick together, we can emerge more strongly. We cannot work separately. We have to work together, create the source of growth, and try to protect our values and growth interest. We are seeing a rise of populism and protectionism, but one thing I can say that we have to become more united in Europe.
The time has come. Commissioner Barnier may have the TV interview as scheduled, and so we will finish at this moment. Please applaud again, Commissioner Barnier. Merci beaucoup.
Je voudrais, Mesdames, Messieurs, vous remercier de votre accueil et de...
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your kindnesses. I'm very happy that so many of you have come to join me this morning. Diplomacy, politics, NPO. I know you must be holding a very important position in various different institutions, and I've been visiting here for 2 days. I have some more scheduled to go through. We will continue very hard to continue dialogue with you, because within Asia, Japan is very important. Asia itself is, of course, important. Many important things are happening. So I thank you once again for your turnout and presence. Thank you for your candid and frank view. I'm always willing to be candid in trying to describe to you what's happening in Europe. Together with Japan, we would like to make a society more stable, more equitable in the world. Thank you once again for your presence.